Hello children, today we're going to start another chapter and the name of the chapter is Physical and Chemical Change. So changes, so everything which we see around, whether it is in any state, solid, liquid or gas, we see some changes in them and we need to identify which one is physical and which one is chemical change. So usually in physical change we need to remember is just change in their physical appearance, just in their physical state. And in chemical changes are just in not just in their appearance but also in their chemical composition. And one thing to remember is in chemical change sometimes some new substance may be formed, but in physical change no new substances are formed. And another thing to remember is in physical change the change can be reversible. That means if you get anything different you can again get back the original thing, but in chemical changes you cannot get back the original substance. So starting with physical change, so as it says, physical change are, as I already told you, it's just in the physical appearance. We can see here in the volume, state, temperature, shape, size, color, weight and texture. If any changes occur in those parameters, then it is known as a physical change. Suppose we take an example of water, or to be precise, let's say ice. So ice, whenever it's heated, it is converted into liquid, and whenever that liquid is again freezed, we are getting back the ice. So this is an example of physical change. Why? Because the chemical composition is water. In liquid state also it's water, and in ice state also it's water. So that means the chemical composition, there is no changes out there, only in the physical appearance. In form of ice it's solid, whenever it's water, that is liquid. So this is an example of a physical change. Now we also have some changes out here. As it says, if we are taking a ball of clay and we are making that clay into different shape, that is an example of physical change. Why? Because the chemical composition is same, it's the same clay, but only its shape is changing. Then another one, if a goldsmith is taking a piece of gold and it's making that gold into different articles, it's also an example of physical change. Why? Because the composition of gold remains the same. No matter if you make ring or earrings or any other ornaments with the gold, the composition remains the same. Now another one is, whenever we are taking a water and we are heating it, it will change into water vapor. That water vapor is also water. The chemical composition out there is also water. So when it cools down, it will again convert into liquid. So example of physical change, and there are many more out here. That freezing of Dal Lake. So during the winter time, the Dal Lake in Kashmir, it freezes, but that doesn't change its chemical composition. As the temperature, like as it approaches summer, it will again melt and form liquid. So these are some of the examples of physical change. And we remember one thing, in all these examples, no new substance are formed. If it was water, in other state, we are getting the same water and no new substances are formed. And one thing to remember is it is reversible. So these are some of the examples of physical change. So in physical change, as I told you, that no new substances are formed. It's the same water, whether it is in solid form or liquid form, it's the same water, and only its states are being changed. So in physical state, physical change, no new substances are formed, and it is easy to get back its original position. That means it is reversible. If you are getting ice from water, it's also always possible to get water from ice. So this one is irreversible. So this is an example of a physical change. Now next is chemical change. Chemical changes, the name suggests, in chemical change its state changes. In some cases even its color are changed. There is every possibilities that even the states may change. But the thing which makes chemical change different from physical change is, in chemical change, new substances are formed. It might be one or it might be more new substances are formed, and because of that this change is not irreversible. That means if you are getting some product, it's impossible again to get back the original thing from which we are getting the product. So this is an example of this is chemical change. So if you see some of the examples, out here. Suppose a paper. So if you tear a paper, that means paper will be in two halves. So that is an example of physical change. Why? Because it's the same paper, but it's just divided into two parts. No new substances are formed. But if you burn that paper, from there some gases will release, and the paper, the burned paper will be different from the original one. And one thing to remember is you cannot get back the original paper. So this is an example of chemical change. So here there is an example given to you. So fruit is shown, and after some times it changes into a dark brown color. That shows that the fruit is rotten. So in this case you cannot get back the original fruit from this rotten one. So this is an example of a chemical change. Why? Because as the food starts rotting, some chemical changes occur inside it and some new products are formed. Because of that we are getting the spoiled one. So once the food is spoiled, we cannot get the original product. So this is an example of chemical change. So some examples of chemical change would be cooking of food. So once you start cooking the food, you cannot get the original raw product. So this is an example of chemical change. So a very good example would be changing of milk into curd. So once your milk is converted to curd, you cannot get back the original milk. Why? Because when the milk is converted to curd, some chemical reaction is taking place and one of the product is formed. That is, the new product will be your lactic acid, which makes the milk sour in taste. So that's why your curds are sour. So once you get curd from the milk, it's not possible again to get back the milk from the curd. So that is chemical reaction. So there are some reactions out there which can both be said as chemical as well as physical reaction. So one of the example would be the burning of candle. So once you start burning the candle, some reactions are taking place. That means since the top portion of the candle is burning, and you can see which is known as your wick. So your wick is burning, and the down portion, the white one, which is your wax, it starts melting. So here you can see it's both physical and chemical change. Once the wick starts burning, some gas are being produced, that is your carbon gas are produced. Some gases are being released, and that is an example of chemical change. Why? Because in chemical change some new products are formed, and you can see the wax, it starts melting. So once the wax, it starts melting, it will deposit at the bottom, and after some times it will again cool down and form the solid wax. So melting of wax is an example of physical change. So in burning of candle, both physical and chemical change takes place simultaneously. So there are some examples out here, like which usually happens in our day-to-day life. So these are some of the examples of physical, the chemical changes. So I would like to mention it. So it's out here. So the plaster of Paris. So everyone knows what is plaster of Paris. So if you have anytime if you have fractured your arm, so doctor puts a plaster in your hand. So he will be using that plaster of Paris. So it is an example of chemical change. Why? Because plaster of Paris, whenever it comes in contact with water, so that powder will now change into product that is known as a gypsum. Like it's not mentioned in the book, but whenever that powder comes in, plaster of Paris, when it comes in contact with water, it will change into gypsum, which is a very hard substance. So that's why whenever you are fracturing your arm, after some times whenever you put plaster,